Don't look at me like that. Clara's voice didn't shake. It cut. I know what you see. I've seen it on every face in every town for 5 years. So, before you make your decision, before you say a single word, you should know what's under this veil. She lifted it herself. The scar. The silence. The whole town of Red Hollow holding its breath. She waited for the disgust, for the pity, for him to step back. Ethan Walker stepped forward. I wasn't looking at your face, he said quietly. I was looking at the woman brave enough to show it. If this story already lives in your chest, subscribe. Follow Clara and Ethan all the way to the end and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach was 40 minutes late. Ethan Walker knew because he had checked his pocket watch 11 times. He was not a nervous man by nature. 30 years of ranching had burned most nervousness out of him, the way the Arizona sun burned everything else slowly, completely without apology. He had survived droughts and cattle sickness, and a winter that killed 17 of his best horses. He had buried his wife on a Tuesday morning and gone back to work by Thursday because the cattle still needed feeding, and grief he had learned did not pause for anything. But standing outside the Red Hollow post office with a hand-painted sign that read, C. Bennett, in letters he had practiced 3 times, before getting right, Ethan Walker was nervous. Not because he was afraid of the woman coming, because he was afraid of himself. Afraid that he had made a promise he didn't know how to keep. Afraid that whoever stepped off that coach would look at him. Really. Look at him, the creased face, the calloused hands, the silence he wore like a second coat, and decide the advertisement had been misleading. Rancher, 40, honest, quiet, looking for a partner, not a prize. He had written those words himself, crossed out 4 drafts before settling on them. He meant every syllable, but meaning something and living it were 2 different things, and Ethan Walker had spent enough years alone to know that good intentions didn't automatically make a man easy to live beside. She's coming, said a voice to his left. That was Deputy Russ Calloway, 23 years old, too curious for his own good, leaning against the post office wall with his thumbs hooked in his belt like he was watching a show. I know she's coming, Ethan said. That's why I'm standing here. You nervous? No. Your jaw's doing that thing it does when you're nervous. Ethan didn't answer that. The stagecoach came around the corner of Main Street with its usual noise, the horses blowing hard, the wheels grinding the dry packed earth, the driver calling out, "Whoa, whoa," in a voice that had said those words 10,000 times and had no feeling left in them. It stopped. The door opened, and the whole town of Red Hollow held its breath. She came out last. 2 men stepped off first, both traveling through to Tucson, neither paying much attention to the crowd. Then a woman with a baby, who was greeted by a man Ethan recognized as the new school teacher's husband. Then nothing for a long moment. Then a hand appeared on the doorframe. Small, gloved, gripping hard. Clara Bennett stepped onto the street of Red Hollow like someone stepping onto a stage they hadn't agreed to perform on. She was average height, wearing a dark traveling dress that had been mended at the left sleeve, and over her face covering everything from her hairline to her chin. She wore a veil of dark lace so thick that her features were completely invisible beneath it. The crowd reacted the way crowds always did to something they didn't understand. They went quiet first, then they started talking. Not to her, not in her direction. To each other in the voices people use when they think they're being discreet but aren't. What in the world? Is she sick? Why would she cover her face like that? Something must be wrong with her. Something must be... Clara heard every word. Ethan watched her hear them. Watched her shoulders draw slightly inward, the way a person moves when they're trying to take up less space in the world. Watched her chin drop just a fraction, the tiny retreat of someone who has been looked at this way before and has learned that the looking always ends the same. He walked forward before he thought about it. Not slowly, not with ceremony. He just walked forward, because she was standing alone in the middle of a street full of staring people, and that was not something he was willing to let continue. "Miss Bennett," he said. She looked up. Through the veil, he couldn't see her expression, but he could see the tension in her posture shift. Not disappear. Just shift the way tension does when it doesn't know yet whether the thing coming is safe. "Mr. Walker," she said. Her voice was steadier than he expected. Clear, careful, like someone who had rehearsed staying composed. "You had a long trip," he said. 3 days. "You must be tired." She paused. Something changed in the set of her jaw. "I need to say something before we go any further." Ethan waited. "I should have said it in the letters. I know that now. I thought—" Another pause. He could hear her steadying herself, pulling courage up from somewhere deep. "I thought it might not matter. That maybe I could just arrive and work hard and it wouldn't. But I can hear them talking, and I think you should know before you decide." "Know what?" he said, though he was beginning to understand. She reached up with both hands and lifted the veil. The crowd went very quiet. Ethan looked at her face, saw the scar that ran from her left temple across her cheekbone, white and raised and permanent. Saw the eyes above it, dark brown, exhausted, waiting to be dismissed. "I'm not beautiful," she said. Her voice barely carried. "I thought you should know before you decide anything." He heard someone in the crowd murmur something. He didn't look to find out who. He picked up her traveling bag from beside the stagecoach step. "You're everything I need," he said. Then he looked at her directly so there would be no confusion about whether he meant it. "Let's go home." She didn't speak for the first mile. Neither did he. Ethan had learned long ago that silence after something hard wasn't rudeness. It was just people taking time to find their footing. He drove the wagon and let the land do what it always did, opened up around them wide and honest. The kind of space that reminded you how small most problems were against the horizon. It was Clara who finally spoke. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Do what? Pretend it doesn't matter." Ethan thought about that for a moment. "I'm not pretending anything. You saw my face." "I did. And it matches what I saw in your letters," he said. "Somebody with more sense than fear who's been treated badly enough that they expect more of the same." He kept his eyes on the road. "I'm not more of the same, Miss Bennett. That's all I can tell you right now. The rest you'll have to decide for yourself." She was quiet again. Then, "My name is Clara." "I know," he said. "Mine's Ethan. And I don't make promises I can't keep, Clara. So I'm going to ask you to give me the chance to show you what I mean before you make up your mind about what kind of man I am." She looked at him for a long moment. He felt it without turning his head. "All right," she said finally. "That's fair." It was the quietest agreement he'd ever made. It felt somehow like the most important one. Lone Star Valley Ranch appeared around the bend of a dry creek just as the sun began its long afternoon slide toward the western ridgeline. Clara saw it and didn't say anything immediately, which Ethan had learned to read as the good kind of quiet, the quiet of someone who was looking carefully rather than judging quickly. The main house was not grand. 2 stories wood-framed with a porch that ran the full front length and a roof that had been repaired in sections over many years, each section slightly different from the last. The barn behind it was larger than the house. There were 3 outbuildings, a working well, a kitchen garden that had gone slightly wild on the left side where someone had stopped keeping up with it. His wife's side, Margaret, had kept that garden like it was her 3rd child. After she died, Ethan had maintained the practical half the vegetables, the herbs she used for cooking, and let the decorative part go because he didn't know what she had planted or why, and it felt dishonest to pretend he did. "It needs work," he said. Not an apology, just honesty. "Most things worth having do," Clara said. He looked at her. She was looking at the garden. He decided not to say anything about that, but he stored it away the way she had responded, the matter-of-fact quality of it, like someone who had stopped expecting things to be easy. He helped her down from the wagon. She accepted his hand briefly, then released it quickly, not rudely, but with the carefulness of someone who didn't assume touch was welcome. He showed her the house. The front room, the kitchen, the sleeping quarters upstairs. He had cleaned everything the week before, with a thoroughness that embarrassed him slightly when he thought about it later. He had even put a small vase of wildflowers on the kitchen table, then removed it because it seemed presumptuous, then put it back again because the table looked bare without it. The vase was still there. Clara saw it and didn't comment on it, but her hand brushed the edge of the table as she walked past it in a way that told him she had noticed. "The room at the end of the hall is yours," he said. "You'll have privacy. That's a promise." She turned to look at him. Something in her expression shifted, something careful measuring. "Thank you," she said, "for that." "It's your home," he said simply. "You have the right to feel safe in it." She looked away quickly. Then, and Ethan had the sense that something small but significant had just shifted between them, the way the air shifts before weather. He went back out to see to the horses and gave her the evening to herself. She was awake before he was the next morning. He came downstairs to find the kitchen already warm, coffee already made, and Clara standing at the stove with her back to him, still in her traveling dress, her hair pinned up simply. The veil was not on her face. He noticed that without remarking on it. "You didn't have to do this," he said. She turned and looked at him directly, unflinching. It was the first time he'd seen her face clearly in morning light. The scar was exactly what it was, permanent, significant, unmistakable. And her eyes above it were the kind of dark brown that looked like they'd seen more than their fair share of the world's less generous behavior. "I know I didn't have to," she said. "I wanted something to do." "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I expected." "That's something." "The room is quiet," she said. "I'm not used to quiet." He poured himself coffee and sat down at the table. "Where were you before this?" "Wichita last. Before that, Abilene." "Long way from home." "This is home now," she said. Not warmly, not coldly, just factually, like someone updating a record. He looked at her over the coffee cup. "You can make it whatever you want," he said. "That's not me being polite. This place needs someone who gives a damn about it, and I've been too deep inside my own head for too long to do it justice." She set a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of him. Then she sat across from him at the table, not at the far end, not standing at the stove but across from him, like they had always eaten this way, and she said, "Tell me about this ranch, what it needs, what it's missing." And Ethan Walker, who had not sat across a breakfast table from another person in 4 years, told her. By the end of the first week, something had shifted. Ethan noticed it the way you notice weather gradually, then all at once. Clara worked the way he worked, steadily, without complaint, without asking for recognition. She mended the back fence line on Thursday because she saw it needed doing and didn't ask permission first. She reorganized the kitchen with a practical logic that made him feel slightly ashamed he hadn't seen it himself. She carried water from the well without being asked, helped him with the evening feeding rounds, and once on the 4th evening, she found his injured dog Roper limping in the yard and sat down right there in the dust beside him and talked to the dog in a low voice while she examined his paw. Ethan watched that from the barn doorway for a full minute before she heard him. She looked up, and for half a second, he caught something on her face that wasn't the composed, careful expression she wore for everything else. Something warmer. Something that was just her, without the guardedness. Then it was gone. "He's got a cactus spine in his pad," she said. "Do you have tweezers?" "In the medicine cabinet, second shelf." She got them. She removed the spine. Roper licked her hand with the grateful generosity that dogs apply to anyone who makes them feel better, and Clara laughed a short, surprised sound like she'd forgotten she knew how to do it. Ethan had to look away because something in his chest did something he wasn't prepared for. Yeah, it was on a Sunday evening, 11 days after her arrival, that she said the thing that told him what he was really dealing with. They were on the porch after supper. The day had cooled to something bearable. Roper was asleep at Clara's feet, The dog had adopted her with a speed and completeness that Ethan found both amusing and faintly pointed, as if even the dog could see something Ethan was supposed to be paying attention to. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask," she said. "I might not answer." "Fair enough." He set down his coffee. "The letters you wrote, they were careful. Everything was careful, practical. You told me what you could do, what you needed, what you were offering. But you never said a single word about what you wanted." She was quiet. "I'm not asking you to say it now," he said quickly. I noticed it." "What do you want me to say?" "Nothing you're not ready to say. That's the whole point." He looked out at the dark settling over the land. "I just wanted you to know I noticed that there's more to you than what you offered in those letters. And I'm not in any hurry. This isn't a transaction with a deadline." Clara was still for a long time. Then, "People spend their whole lives teaching you that what you want doesn't matter," she said quietly. "After a while, you stop bothering to figure out what it is." He heard the weight behind that, the years of it. "What did you want?" he asked, "before people taught you that lesson?" She looked down at Roper sleeping at her feet. "To teach," she said. "I wanted to be a teacher." "What happened?" She touched the scar without thinking about it, just one finger briefly on the edge of the raised white line. Then she seemed to realize what she was doing and dropped her hand. "The school board in Abilene decided a teacher with a scarred face would disturb the children," she said. "The school board in Wichita decided the same thing. The school board in 3 other towns before that decided the same thing." It's how the world works," she said. Not bitterly, not with self-pity, just with the flat accuracy of someone reporting facts they've had a long time to stop fighting. "I stopped being surprised by it." "You shouldn't have to stop being surprised by it," Ethan said. "It's wrong." She looked at him then, really looked at him in that direct way she had when something caught her off guard. "Yes," she said after a moment. "It is." Something in the word, in the way she let herself agree out loud with another person, felt like a door opening. Just a crack, but open. It was on the 14th day that Ethan learned about the fire. He learned it by accident. He was in the barn mending tack when 2 men he didn't know came by looking for work drifters, moving through the kind that passed through Red Hollow a dozen times a season. He told them he wasn't hiring. They left, but on their way back to the road, he heard one of them say to the other, "That woman on the porch, I thought I recognized her. Wasn't she the one from that fire in Caldwell? The woman who—" Ethan stopped what he was doing. He went to the house. Clara was in the kitchen rolling pastry for a pie, her back to him. "The fire in Caldwell," he said. Her hands stopped moving. "Who told you about that?" she said carefully. "Some drifters passing through. One of them thought he recognized you." He leaned against the doorframe. "What happened?" She was quiet long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she set down the rolling pin and turned around, and her expression was the most unguarded he had ever seen it. Not open exactly, but stripped of the careful composure she usually wore. "There was a fire," she said. "A boarding house in Caldwell. 5 years ago. And there was a child on the 2nd floor. A little girl 4 years old. Her mother had gone to fetch water, and by the time anyone realized the fire had spread, nobody could get to the stairs." He waited. "I was the closest," Clara said. "I went in." Ethan was very still. "I got her out," Clara said. "She was fine. A breath. "She's fine. She'd be 9 years old now. I think about that sometimes." "And the scar. A beam came down," she said simply, "while I was on the stairs. I was lucky it only caught my face and not my eyes." A pause. "I didn't think it was luck for a long time after, but I do now." Ethan said nothing for a long moment. What he felt was complicated in a way he didn't have immediate words for. Not pity, not sympathy exactly, something more like recognition. The recognition of someone who had been broken and rebuilt in ways that weren't visible on the surface. They turned you away from teaching because of a scar you got saving a child, he said. Yes. That's the most foolish thing I've ever heard. Something shifted in her expression, something like the edge of a smile, exhausted but real. It is rather. I'm sorry, he said. That it happened. All of it, the fire, what came after everything they took from you. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. I want to. There's a difference. He looked at her steadily. Clara, what those people did, those school boards, those employers, all of them, they were wrong. That's not something you should have been taught to accept. She pressed her lips together. Nobody said that to me before, she said, very quietly, like the words surprised her coming out. Well, Ethan said, somebody should have. He turned and went back to the barn, because something was happening in the back of his throat that he didn't think it was fair to put on her right now. And Clara stood in the kitchen with flour on her hands and something happening behind her eyes that she hadn't felt in a very long time. The strange, unfamiliar, slightly terrifying feeling of being believed. 3 weeks after Clara's arrival, something happened that Ethan had not expected. She started pushing back. Not against him, against the way she had been living inside herself. He noticed it first when Hank Greer, his hired hand, made a comment at supper about the garden layout. Nothing particularly cruel, just dismissive, the casual dismissal men used when they didn't think a woman's opinion needed engaging with. That's a lot of work for something that won't produce much, Hank said about the flower section Clara had mentioned wanting to restore. Clara looked at him. It'll produce plenty, she said. Color for one thing, bees for another, and in case you haven't noticed, the kitchen garden on the practical side gets better pollination when there are flowers nearby. I've been watching it for 3 weeks, and the correlation is clear. Hank opened his mouth, closed it. Ethan looked at his plate to hide something. After supper, he found Clara in the kitchen cleaning up, and she was very carefully not looking at him. Was that too much? She asked. No, he said. I don't usually. I know, he said. And it wasn't too much. He picked up a dish to dry. It was exactly right. You knew something. You said it. That's how it works here. She was quiet. Then, I keep waiting for the consequence. For what? For saying what I think. For... She shook her head. People didn't usually like it when I did. Then they were wrong about that too, he said, along with everything else. She looked at him. Why are you being kind to me? She said. Not suspiciously, not bitterly, with the genuine bewilderment of someone who genuinely didn't understand the logic. He thought about it carefully before he answered. Because you came here scared, he said at last. And you stayed honest anyway. And you work harder than anyone I've known in years, and you've never once asked me to tell you you're doing a good job. He set the dish down. Because you deserve somebody in your corner, Clara, and I'm in a position to be that person. It's not complicated. She looked at him for a long time. Then she turned back to the dishes. Thank you, she said. So quietly he almost didn't catch it. But he did. Oh. It was 4 weeks to the day after her arrival that Ethan Walker stood on his own porch in the early morning dark and understood that he was in serious danger of something he had not planned for. He was not a man who moved quickly toward anything emotional. He had learned to be careful with his own heart, the way you learn to be careful with anything that if it breaks, you cannot easily repair. But there it was. Something had happened in the last 4 weeks that he couldn't account for in practical terms. Something about the way she stood at the kitchen window thinking, the way she laughed at Roper's attempts at dignity, the way she asked his opinion about things and then listened to the answer, really listened, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually absorbing what he said. The way she had, without fanfare, without announcement, become part of the daily rhythm of this place. He had built a ranch for one. He had been living like a man who deserved only that. And somewhere in the last 4 weeks, without either of them making a decision about it, This house had started feeling like it was built for two. He stood there in the dark for a long time. Then he went inside. And he started thinking for the first time in years about what the future might actually look like. Not alone, not empty, but with someone beside him who had come here broken and was slowly, quietly, stubbornly putting herself back together, and who made him want to be someone worthy of watching that happen. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It came addressed to Ethan in handwriting he didn't recognize, postmarked from Wichita. He opened it at the kitchen table after supper. Clara reading at the other end, Roper asleep between them on the floor. He read it. He read it again. Then he set it down very carefully. "What is it?" Clara asked without looking up from her book. He told her. It was from a man named Virgil Oates, a land broker. The letter was polite, even friendly, in that particular way that letters from predatory men are friendly when they want something. The letter informed Ethan that there was a legal question about the deed to Lone Star Valley Ranch. A question regarding the boundary survey from 1873. A question that, if unresolved, could potentially affect the ranch's status as private property. The letter helpfully offered Oates's services in resolving this question. For a fee, of course. Clara had gone very still. "That's not a legal question," she said quietly. "That's a threat." Ethan looked at her. "You know something about this kind of thing," he said. "Not a question." She set her book down. In Abilene, a man named Garrett did something similar to 3 ranchers east of town. He manufactured a boundary dispute out of an old survey error, then offered to make it go away. 2 of the ranchers paid, the 3rd didn't. A pause. The 3rd lost his land. How? Garrett had a county surveyor on his payroll, she said. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the paperwork was done. Ethan stared at the letter. "What did you do?" he asked. "In Abilene, when you found out." "I wrote to the Territorial Land Office," she said, "and I found the original survey records from the county clerk's archive." She met his eyes. The ones Garrett didn't know existed. Ethan was very still for a moment. "You stopped him," he said. "The 3rd rancher stopped him," she said. "I just helped him find what he needed." Ethan looked at her across the table at this woman who had arrived 3 weeks ago behind a veil, who had moved through his house like someone expecting to be asked to leave at any moment, who had rebuilt the kitchen garden and reorganized his medicine cabinet and made his dog fat and happy, and he thought, "There is so much more here than you ever told me." "Clara," he said. "Yes. I'm going to need your help with this." And Clara Bennett, who had spent 5 years being told she wasn't useful, wasn't wanted, wasn't worth having around, looked at Ethan Walker across that kitchen table and felt something in her chest do something she'd forgotten it was capable of. She felt necessary. "Then let's get to work," she said. By Friday morning they were already at the county clerk's office, and by Friday evening they had found the first thread. And when Clara pulled that thread, looking at Ethan from across the clerk's wooden counter, with ink on her fingers, and the focused light in her eyes of someone who had found exactly what she was looking for, Ethan Walker understood something clearly for the first time. He hadn't placed that advertisement looking for someone to fill a space. He had been looking for this, not an arrangement, not a convenience, a partner. And somehow, against every reasonable expectation, she had found her way here. The county clerk's name was Horace Finley, and he had the energy of a man who had spent 30 years protecting paper from people who wanted to change what the paper said. He was small, precise, and deeply suspicious of anyone who walked through his door with urgency. "Survey records from 1873, he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "That's a long time ago." "Yes," Clara said, "which is exactly why we need to see them." "May I ask why?" "Because someone is using an alleged error in those records to threaten a legal claim against this ranch," she said. "And we'd like to see the original before that someone has the opportunity to make it disappear." Horace Finley looked at her. Then he looked at Ethan. Then he looked back at Clara with the expression of a man recalibrating something. "You've dealt with this kind of thing before," he said. I have, she said. He went to the back room. Ethan stood beside Clara at the counter and said nothing. He had watched her walk into this office 40 minutes ago and become someone he hadn't seen before, not the careful, guarded woman who moved through his house like she was waiting for permission, but someone else entirely. Precise, focused, unafraid. He liked it considerably. Finley came back with a leather-bound ledger and 2 rolled survey maps. He set them on the counter and stepped back. Clara opened the ledger first. She didn't touch the maps. She read 3 pages of the ledger with the concentration of someone who already knew what they were looking for and was simply confirming it was there. Here, she said. She turned the ledger so Ethan could see. Her finger rested on a line of clerk's handwriting from 1873. The original survey was conducted by a man named T.R. Alcott, she said. He filed the boundary description with this office, and it was recorded in the county deed register. She looked up. Mr. Finley, is that deed register still here? Everything's still here, Finley said with the pride of a man who considered this his greatest achievement. I've never lost a document in 22 years. Then I need the deed register for the years 1872 through 1875, she said. And I need to know whether anyone has requested access to these survey maps in the last 6 months. Finley went still. Why would that matter? Because if someone is manufacturing a boundary dispute, Clara said, the first thing they need to do is study the original so they know where to introduce the error. She looked at him steadily. Have these records been accessed recently? Horace Finley pressed his lips together. 2 months ago, he said quietly. A lawyer from Tucson said he was doing a title search for a client purchasing property nearby. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Ethan. What was the lawyer's name? Ethan said. Monroe, Finley said. J.T. Monroe. Clara pulled Virgil Oates's letter from her coat pocket and set it on the counter, smoothing it flat. Is this a name you recognize? She said, pointing to the signature. Finley read it. Something moved across his face. Oates, he said. Virgil Oates was in here 6 weeks ago asking about general land holdings in this county. He looked up. He said he was a land investor. He's not a land investor, Clara said. He's a land thief. And he has a lawyer named Monroe who studies original records, so he knows exactly where to introduce a falsified amendment. She began copying information from the ledger in a small notebook she produced from her coat. We're going to need copies of these records, Mr. Finley. Official copies stamped by your office. I can do that, Finley said. It'll take until tomorrow. Then we'll be back tomorrow, Clara said. She closed her notebook, picked up her coat, and turned toward the door. Then she paused and looked back at Finley. Don't let anyone else access these records until we return, she said. Anyone. If someone requests them, you've misplaced them temporarily for routine inventory. Can you do that? Horace. Finley straightened slightly. Miss Bennett, he said. I have been protecting documents in this office for 22 years. He paused. No one's touching these records. Outside in the street, Ethan walked beside Clara for half a block before he said anything. How did you know to ask about recent access? He said. Because that's what Garrett's lawyer did in Abilene, she said. You can't falsify a boundary description unless you know the exact language of the original. You have to study it first. If Monroe studied these records 2 months ago and Oates's letter arrived last week, the timeline fits. She looked up. They're in the early stage. They haven't filed anything yet. Which means we have time. Which means we have a small amount of time, she corrected. There's a difference. He looked at her sideways. You're different in there than you are at the ranch. She glanced at him. Something flickered. Is that a problem? No, he said. It's just I'm not sure which version surprised me more. The one who spent an hour with Roper last night when he was restless, or the one who just walked into a county clerk's office and ran the entire conversation inside of 12 minutes. Clara looked forward. They're the same person. I know, Ethan said. That's what I mean. She was quiet for a moment. Then, The world didn't like it when I knew things. It made them uncomfortable. I learned to put it away. Put it away around them, Ethan said. Not around me. She looked at him then. Something in his expression was entirely serious and entirely calm, the way Ethan Walker always was when he meant something completely. She looked away first, but she didn't argue. They had work to do. The ride back to the ranch was different from the ride home on her first day. Not warmer exactly, or rather warmer in a way that had stopped being surprising and started being something she could feel in the steadier rhythm of her own breathing. Ethan drove and she sat beside him with her notebook open, reading through the information she'd copied, cross-referencing it against the details in Oates's letter, her handwriting small and precise in the fading evening light. The boundary description in the original survey runs along the dry creek bed to a point marked by 3 cottonwood trees, she said. If those trees no longer exist, or if someone argues they were on the other side of the creek shifted, Ethan said. She looked up. About 15 years ago, he said. Flash flood. The channel moved about 40 feet east. He paused. I know because I spent 3 weeks that summer redigging the irrigation line. Clara stared at him. Ethan, that's what they're going to use. He glanced at her. If the original survey marks a boundary by the creek and the creek has moved, they can argue that the legal boundary moved with it, she said, which would put 40 feet of your eastern pasture outside your deed. She calculated quickly. That's the line that runs closest to the main road. The most valuable 40 feet of the property, he said, which they'd then claim as disputed territory, she said, and which Oates would offer to resolve for a fee. And if you didn't pay, they'd file a legal claim, Ethan finished, and the litigation would cost more than the fee. They looked at each other in the pale evening light. We need proof of the creek's original position, Clara said. Something that predates the flood, a photograph, a second survey. Anything that establishes where the channel ran in 1873. Margaret kept records, Ethan said quietly. Everything about this land. She was methodical that way. I've got boxes of her papers in the back bedroom. He paused. I never went through them. He said it simply, without drama. But Clara heard what was underneath it, the quiet weight of 4 years of leaving something untouched, because touching it meant something he hadn't been ready for. We'll look through them tonight, she said. Her voice was even and practical, because that was what he needed right now, not acknowledgement of the weight, but someone willing to carry it with him. He nodded once. They drove the rest of the way home in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before. Not empty, not careful. The silence of 2 people who were both thinking about the same problem and who had stopped being cautious about the fact that they were doing it together. Margaret Walker's papers were in 3 wooden boxes stacked in the corner of the back bedroom under a canvas cover. Ethan brought them downstairs without a word. He set them on the kitchen table. He stood looking at them for a moment, not long, just a moment, with an expression that Clara had the sense of understanding without being able to fully name. You don't have to stay for this part, she said. Yes, I do, he said, and sat down. They worked for 3 hours. Margaret Walker, it turned out, had kept records the way some people keep promises, thoroughly with care, with the sense that details mattered, because the people depending on them mattered. There were receipts, ledgers, letters from neighboring ranchers, a correspondence with the county irrigation board, and in the second box near the bottom, folded carefully inside a piece of oilcloth, a hand-drawn property map. The map had a date, March 1874. It showed the eastern boundary of Lone Star Valley Ranch in careful, precise lines. And it showed the creek. In 1874, the creek ran 40 feet west of where it ran today. Clara spread the map on the table and weighted the corners with Ethan's coffee cup and a candle holder. That's it, she said. That's what we need. Ethan stared at the map, at his wife's handwriting in the corner, neat and deliberate with the date and the notation, Property Boundary Verified, EW concurs. She always thought someone might need this someday, he said. Not to Clara particularly. More to the room, to the air. She used to say you can't protect something you haven't documented. She was right, Clara said quietly. A long pause. She would have liked you, Ethan said. Clara looked up. His expression was honest and unguarded in the way it got sometimes at the end of long evenings when he was too tired to maintain his usual reserve. I mean that, he said. She valued people who didn't perform, who were just what they were. He looked at the map. She would have put you in charge of something important within a week. Clara looked down at the map. She didn't know what to do with that. Not because it was unwelcome, because it was the opposite, because it landed somewhere in her chest with a warmth she didn't have practice receiving. We should make a copy of this tonight, she said, and get the original somewhere safe. Agreed, he said. He didn't push it further. He just reached for a blank sheet of paper and handed her the pen. That was another thing about him she was realizing. He knew when to let something be. It was not a common skill. The next morning, Ethan rode into town alone. He told Clara he needed to pick up the copies from Finley and make one additional stop, and he asked her to stay at the ranch. He didn't tell her why for the additional stop. He went to see Caleb Horn. Caleb Horn was Red Hollow's only attorney, a man in his late 50s who had spent 30 years handling Will's property disputes and the occasional criminal matter, and who had a reputation for being slow to act, but impossible to outsmart. Ethan walked into his office at 9:30 and put Oates's letter, the copies of the 1873 survey, and the copy of Margaret's 1874 property map on Caleb's desk. He said, "Someone's trying to take my land. I need to know my options." Caleb read everything. He took 20 minutes. He set the papers down. "Who is this man Oates?" he said. "Land broker," Ethan said. "Running a scheme. My Clara has seen it done before in Abilene. Man named Garrett." Caleb's eyes sharpened. "I know about Garrett. He tried something similar in Pima County 3 years back. Territorial court shut him down, but it took 2 years. I don't have 2 years. Then you need to file a preemptive quiet title action, Caleb said. You go to the court first before Oates files anything. You present the original survey and the 1874 map, and you ask the court to affirm the boundary as legally established. Once that's on record, any claim Oates files is dead on arrival." He looked at Ethan. "It costs money." "How much?" Caleb told him. Ethan was quiet for a moment. It was not a small amount. "How long does it take?" he said. 6 to 8 weeks if we file Monday," Caleb said. "But here's the thing. Ethan, we need those originals in the hands of this court before Monroe, or whoever Oates has working for him, makes any kind of amendment filing. If they file first." "Clara said we have a small amount of time," Ethan said. "Your Clara is right." Caleb tapped the map. "Where did this come from?" "My wife kept it," Ethan said. 4 years ago." Caleb looked at him. Something in his expression shifted. Margaret knew about this kind of thing. "She knew about this land," Ethan said. "She documented everything." Caleb shook his head slowly. "She saved you. She saved this ranch." A pause. "You know that—" Ethan looked at the copy of Margaret's handwriting, at the careful lines of the map, the deliberate notation in the corner. "Yes," he said. "I know that." He rode home thinkings about 2 women. The one who had mapped this land because she understood that love sometimes means building something that protects the people who come after you, and the one who had opened those boxes without flinching and spent 3 hours at his kitchen table finding what someone else had been wise enough to leave behind. He didn't know exactly what to call what was happening with Clara. He knew it was real, and he knew it scared him considerably less than it would have 6 weeks ago. When he got back to the ranch, he found something unexpected. Hank Greer was standing in the yard with his hat in his hands, and Clara was standing 10 feet from him with her arms crossed, and an expression Ethan had never seen on her face before. Not angry exactly, but the opposite of afraid. "What's going on?" Ethan said, dismounting. Clara looked at him. Mr. Greer has informed me that he went to Caleb's office this morning to check whether the payroll records include an amount for room and board deducted from my wages. She paused. He was concerned that the ranch was carrying extra expense. Ethan looked at Hank. Hank had the grace to look uncomfortable. I just thought with everything and the legal situation. Clara is not ranch expense, Ethan said. Clara is my wife. Well, technically, Hank. Ethan's voice was quiet. He had discovered long ago that quiet worked better than loud. What happens on this ranch is my business. What happens in this house is between Clara and me. If you have a concern about payroll, you bring it to me, not to the county clerk's office, and not to anyone else. He looked at him steadily. Are we clear? Hank nodded. Quickly, he left. Ethan turned to Clara. She had uncrossed her arms. Something in her expression had changed, not back to the careful guardedness she usually wore, but to something quieter, slightly undone. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did, he said. And more to the point, you were handling it fine on your own. I was. I know. Something crossed his face. That's not a criticism. She looked at him for a moment. He made me feel like an accounting problem. People do that, Ethan said. When they don't know what to do with someone, they can't categorize. Is that why people did it to me? A pause. Because of the scar. Because of all of it, he said. You don't fit the shape they expect, so they try to reduce you to a number. He met her eyes. You're not a number, Clara. She held his gaze. She didn't look away first this time. Caleb is filing Monday, he said. We have documentation. We have a case. He held up the papers. We might actually stop this. Something in her expression went from tense to steady. When do we take the originals in? Tomorrow morning, he said. I'd like you to come. I'm coming, she said. Not a question. Not asking permission. A fact. He smiled at that. Not broadly. Ethan didn't do things broadly, but enough that she could see it. That afternoon, 3 things happened. The first was that Roper developed the opinion that the corner of Clara's apron was a toy, and she spent 20 minutes pretending to be annoyed about it while clearly not being annoyed at all. The second was that a neighbor, Tom Ridley, from the adjacent spread, came by for a conversation about the irrigation channel they shared. He was polite to Clara in the careful way that men who've been told something is coming are polite, a little too formal, a little too considered. But he looked at her when she spoke, which was more than some managed. The third was a letter. It arrived with Tom Ridley, who said the postwriter had handed it off at his gate. Ethan opened it at the kitchen table. He read it, set it down. Clara, he said. She came in from the side room where she'd been sorting through additional documents. She looked at his face. What is it? He handed her the letter. It was from Monroe, the Tucson attorney. Not addressed to Ethan this time. Addressed to both of them. Mr. and Mrs. Walker. It was polite. It was regretful. It expressed concern about the situation and explained that there had been a title examination and certain questions had emerged that really needed to be addressed promptly. It mentioned a meeting. Friday of the following week, at the Red Hollow Town Hall, and it mentioned that Virgil Oates and a representative of the Territorial Land Commissioner's office would both be present. The Territorial Land Commissioner. Clara set the letter down carefully. They're escalating, she said. They brought in official cover. Can they do that? If they've already started the paperwork with the Land Commissioner's office, yes. She thought for a moment. It means they found something. Or they created something. Either way we need Caleb. Today, she said. Not Monday. Today. Ethan was already putting on his coat. She grabbed hers. They were at Caleb Horn's office inside of an hour, and the look on Caleb's face when he read Monroe's letter told both of them what they needed to know before he said a word. This changes things, Caleb said. How much? Ethan said. If they've genuinely filed with the land commissioner, they've moved faster than I anticipated. He set the letter down. We need to file the quiet title petition today, this afternoon. Can you do that? Clara said. I can if you authorize it. Authorized, Ethan said without hesitation. Caleb looked at Clara. There's something else. Tell me, she said. Monroe is a territorial attorney, Caleb said. He has influence with the land commissioner's office that I don't have. If this goes to a territorial level hearing, the local documentation, the 1874 map, the survey copies may not be enough on its own. He paused. We need a witness. Someone who can testify to the creek's original position. Someone who was here before the flood. Ethan thought. Tom Ridley. He's been on his spread since 1869. Is he willing to testify? I can ask him. Then ask him today, Caleb said. And there's one more thing. He looked at Clara directly. You said you encountered this scheme in Abilene. You said the man who ran it was Garrett. Yes. Do you know what happened to him? He was stopped, Clara said. The territorial court. I know what the court record says, Caleb said. What I'm asking is, was he prosecuted? Clara frowned. No. The court affirmed the original deeds, but Garrett was never charged with anything criminal. She stopped. Something moved across her face. He moved on, she said. He went somewhere else. She looked at Ethan. Ethan saw it at the same moment she did. Virgil Oates, he said slowly. Clara picked up Monroe's letter and looked at the signature. In Abilene, she said. Garrett worked with a junior partner, a man who handled the paperwork and the county office communications. She looked up. His name wasn't Oates, but he was young, mid-20s. He would be early 30s now. The room was very quiet. The handwriting in this letter, she said. The way it's structured, the approach, the friendly offer first, then the escalation, then the official pressure. She set it down. It's the same pattern, Caleb. It's exactly the same. Caleb folded his hands on the desk. Then we may not just be dealing with a local scheme. No, Clara said. We may be dealing with someone who has been doing this for years, and who has been getting better at it. She looked at Ethan. He was watching her with an expression she was starting to recognize, steady. Certain that particular quality of attention that meant he was taking in not just what she was saying, but what it cost her to say it. Seeing her fully in the way she had never learned to expect from anyone. It made her feel things she did not have immediate words for. What do we do? He said. We file today, she said. We get Tom Ridley, and we write to the sheriff in Abilene. She straightened. If Oates is Garrett's former partner, the Abilene sheriff may have records that connect them. Records that would make any claim Monroe files look like exactly what it is, a continuation of a documented fraud scheme. Caleb stared at her. Miss Bennett, he said, where have you been for the last 5 years? Clara looked at him. Being told I wasn't worth listening to, she said. Caleb had the decency to look affected by that. Well, he said, someone was wrong. Ethan said nothing, but his jaw did the thing it did when he was feeling something he wasn't ready to put into words yet. They filed the petition that afternoon. They rode to Tom Ridley's spread before dark, and Tom Ridley, who was not a man who needed much convincing when he understood that his own land rights might be next, agreed to testify before Ethan finished the second sentence. Clara drafted the letter to the Abilene sheriff at the kitchen table that night by lamplight, and Ethan read it over her shoulder, and at one point his hand rested briefly on the back of her chair, not touching her just there, and she didn't move away from it. When the letter was sealed and addressed, and the papers were stacked and documented, and the lamp was burning low, Ethan said, You know what you did today. She was organizing the papers, not looking up. We did it. Clara. Something in his voice made her stop. She looked up. You walked into that office today knowing more than any of us, he said. You kept your head when the letter arrived. You made the connection between Oates and Garrett when none of the rest of us would have. He looked at her steadily. You saved this ranch today, maybe as much as Margaret did when she made that map. Clara held his gaze. She could feel the truth of what he was saying in a way that wasn't comfortable exactly, because she hadn't learned yet how to receive truth that was good. She was better at deflecting it, better at saying it was nothing or anyone would have, or she was just doing what needed doing. She almost did all of that. Instead, she said, "Thank you." 2 words. Nothing decorated, nothing qualified, just the truth back at him. Ethan nodded. He stood up, put on his coat. "Get some sleep," he said. "We've got a long week ahead." He went upstairs. Clara sat at the kitchen table for a while longer. Roper came and put his head in her lap. She sat with her hand on his head and thought about what it felt like to be trusted, to be believed, to be needed for what she actually was, and not despite it. She had come here looking for a place to breathe. She hadn't expected to find one. She hadn't expected that finding it would change not just where she was, but who she was becoming. Somewhere outside, the wind moved across the land. And inside, for the first time in years, Clara Bennett was not afraid of what the next day would bring. The letter to the Abilene sheriff went out on Saturday morning. By Monday, Caleb Horn had filed the quiet title petition with the territorial court. By Tuesday, Tom Ridley had submitted a signed affidavit confirming the creek's original position, complete with his own hand-drawn notation that matched Margaret's 1874 map point for point. By Wednesday, Ethan had received written confirmation from the court that the petition had been accepted and assigned to a judge in Tucson. Clara put all of it in a folder, organized, dated, cross-referenced. Ethan watched her do it and didn't say anything. But there was something in the way he watched, a quietness that was different from his usual quietness, more deliberate, more aware, that she had started to recognize as the way Ethan Walker looked at things he valued. She was getting better at noticing that. She was not yet sure what to do with it. The week before the town hall meeting moved, the way weeks do, when something significant is approaching faster than it should, with the particular texture of time that makes you feel simultaneously underprepared and strangely calm. Clara spent it the way she spent everything now working. She reread every document they had. She thought through every angle of Monroe's approach. She wrote out a series of questions she anticipated the commissioner's representative might raise, and drafted answers to each of them with the precision of someone who had learned the hard way that improvisation in formal situations was a luxury you couldn't afford when you had no margin for error. Ethan found the list on the kitchen table Thursday evening. He read through it without a word, set it down, picked up his coffee. "You've thought of things Caleb hasn't," he said. "I've had more practice being underestimated," she said. "It teaches you to anticipate." He looked at her. "Is that what happened to you in the school board hearings?" She was quiet for a moment. She had not talked about the school board hearings in detail. She had offered the facts briefly, and he had not pushed. That was the thing about Ethan, he never pushed. He waited, and the waiting somehow made it easier to speak than any amount of pressing would have. "In Abilene, the board had 3 members, she said. 2 of them wouldn't look at me directly. The third one looked at me the whole time, but not at my face, at the scar. Just at the scar, like he was studying something unpleasant in a jar." She set down her pen. "They'd already decided before I walked in. The hearing was a formality." "Did you argue your case anyway?" "Yes." "Why, if you knew the outcome." She thought about that. "Because I had earned the right to make it," she said. "Because no matter what they decided, I wanted there to be a record that I had stood in front of them and told them they were wrong." A pause. "Even if the only person who ever knew it was me." Ethan set his coffee down. "Well," he said quietly, "now I know it too." She looked at him, and again that thing happened, that sensation of being received, of words landing somewhere instead of dissolving in the air, and she looked away first because she still didn't know how to hold that feeling steady for very long without it making her eyes do something she wasn't ready to explain. Friday arrived the way hard days always do. Suddenly. The town hall was already filling when Ethan and Clara arrived. Red Hollow was not a large town, but it had the quality that small towns have of showing up completely for anything that smells like confrontation. Half the ranchers in the county had come, some out of concern for their own land rights, some because Virgil Oates had sent similar feeler letters to 2 other property owners in the county and word had gotten around, and some Clara suspected simply because they wanted to see what happened when someone pushed back. She walked in without the veil. She had stopped wearing it at the ranch weeks ago. She had worn it into Red Hollow twice since her arrival, and both times the second glances and the whispers had made her feel like she was perpetually arriving all over again, perpetually waiting to be assessed and dismissed. Today, she decided she was done arriving. She walked into the town hall in a clean dark dress with her hair up and her folder of documents under her arm, and she walked beside Ethan, and if people stared at the scar on her face, she did not give them the satisfaction of noticing. Caleb Horn met them at the door. He looked slightly surprised, not by her face, but by something else, something in the way she carried herself. "You look ready," he said. "I am," she said. "What do we know about the commissioner's representative?" "His name is Alderson, regional deputy commissioner based out of Phoenix. He's not crooked as far as I can tell. He may genuinely believe this is a legitimate boundary dispute." Caleb lowered his voice. "Monroe is the dangerous one. Watch him. He's going to try to make the documentation question technical so that Alderson gets confused and defaults to the filing Monroe has already made." "I know," she said. "I'll handle the documentation." Caleb blinked. I'm the attorney of record Clara." "And you'll be excellent," she said. "But the documentation questions are going to come down to the specifics of the survey language and the creek displacement history, and I know those details better than anyone in this room." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not stepping on your case. I'm telling you where I can be most useful." Caleb looked at Ethan. Ethan said, "She's right." Caleb absorbed this. Then he nodded. They took their seats. Oates was already there across the room. He was not what Clara had pictured. She had pictured someone overtly unpleasant, the kind of man who announces his character through his face. But Virgil Oates was neat and pleasant-looking, with the easy smile of someone who had practiced it until it felt natural. He was perhaps 32. Well-dressed. He nodded at Ethan with the friendliness of someone who genuinely wanted you to believe this was all a misunderstanding. Monroe was beside him. Taller. Older. The lawyer's posture upright and precise. Clara looked at Monroe and thought about Garrett. About a junior partner in Abilene, with careful handwriting, and an easy way with county clerks. She thought about the structural similarity of the letters, the escalation pattern, the way each approach was designed to make a man feel that fighting was more expensive than paying. She looked at Monroe's hands, the way he organized his papers, the small, precise movements of someone who had done this many times. She was almost certain. Deputy Commissioner Alderson called the meeting to order at 10:30. He was a compact man in his mid-50s, with a bureaucrat's caution and a genuine air of wanting to resolve something that had landed on his desk without much explanation. Monroe went first. He was good. Clara gave him that without hesitation. He laid out the boundary question, clearly cited the original survey, acknowledged the creek displacement, and made the argument smoothly, without obvious aggression, that the natural movement of the waterway had legally shifted the eastern boundary of Lone Star Valley Ranch, and that his client, as a prospective purchaser of the adjacent parcel, had a right to have the boundary correctly established before proceeding. Prospective purchaser. Clara noted that word. Oates had positioned himself as a buyer, not a speculator, a legitimate interested party, not a predator. She wrote one word in her notebook and underlined it. Adjacent. When Monroe finished, Alderson turned to Caleb. Caleb made their case methodically. He introduced the quiet title petition, entered the 1873 survey and the 1874 map into evidence, and submitted Tom Ridley's affidavit. He was thorough and clear. Then Monroe stood up again. "Mr. Horn," he said, with the friendliness of a man who has a weapon he hasn't shown yet. "The 1874 map you've introduced, do you know who created it?" "The notation indicates it was created by Margaret Walker," Caleb said. "Margaret Walker being the previous Mrs. Walker," Monroe said. Not a professional surveyor, not a licensed property assessor, a rancher's wife. He let that settle for a moment. I don't say this to disrespect the deceased, but in a formal boundary dispute, a hand-drawn map by a private citizen with no professional surveying credentials is what we might call informal documentation. Several people in the room shifted. Alderson made a note. Clara had anticipated this. She had anticipated it 3 days ago, and she had the answer ready, but she made herself wait 4 seconds long enough to breathe long enough to be certain before she stood up. "Miss Bennett," Caleb said. "Mrs. Walker," she said for the room. Then to Alderson. "May I address that point, Commissioner?" Alderson looked at Monroe. Monroe spread his hands in a generous gesture, of course. "The 1874 map was created by Margaret Walker," Clara said. "But it was not created independently. In the lower right corner of the map, there is a notation that reads, 'Property boundary, verified EW concurs.' EW is Ethan Walker, who can testify in this proceeding that he was present when the map was drawn and confirmed its accuracy." She opened her folder. "Furthermore, the map was drawn in March of 1874, 14 months after the original T.R. Alcott survey was filed with the county clerk's office. The boundary positions on both documents are in complete agreement. 2 independent records produced 14 months apart showing the same boundary in the same position. That's not informal documentation, Mr. Monroe. That's corroboration." Monroe didn't move. "Additionally," she said, "the creek displacement you have cited as the basis for your client's boundary claim occurred in approximately 1866, per the flood records on file with the County Irrigation Board, which I have also obtained." She produced that document and held it out toward Alderson. "The relevant question is not where the creek runs today. The relevant question is where the legal boundary was established at the time of original filing, and whether a natural geographical event subsequent to that filing has any legal standing to alter a recorded deed." She looked at Alderson directly. "In territorial land law, it does not. A natural event does not retroactively redraw a legal boundary. The boundary remains where it was legally recorded regardless of where water decides to run afterward." The room was very quiet. Alderson was looking at her with undisguised interest. Monroe was looking at her with an expression that had stopped being friendly. "That's an argument for the court," Monroe said. "Not for this meeting." "You're right," Clara said. "And the court will hear it because Mr. Walker has already filed a quiet title petition which was accepted on Monday and assigned to Judge Harlow in Tucson." She turned to Alderson. "The question I'd like to put to you, Commissioner, is whether the Territorial Land Commissioner's office was made aware of that filing when Mr. Monroe requested your office's involvement in this proceeding." Alderson turned to Monroe. Monroe said, "The petition was filed after—" "The petition was filed the same day your letter arrived," Clara said. "Saturday's filing record from Caleb Horn's office confirms the date. We filed within hours of receiving your letter." She kept her voice even. "Factual." "Were you informed of that, Commissioner?" Alderson looked at Monroe. Monroe said nothing. "I was not," Alderson said. The 2 words landed in the room like stones in still water. Monroe recovered quickly. He had the experience to recover quickly. He turned toward Alderson and began explaining the timeline, his version of it carefully structured, and Clara sat down because she had done what needed doing, and she knew better than to push past a moment when the moment was already working. Ethan's knee pressed briefly against hers under the table, not dramatically, not conspicuously, just for a second, just enough. She didn't move away. The meeting recessed for 20 minutes. When Alderson came back, he informed the room that given the pending court filing, it was not appropriate for the Commissioner's office to take any further independent action in the matter until the Tucson court had rendered its decision. In practical terms, Monroe had no official cover anymore. In practical terms, they had won the day. Oates across the room was looking at Clara with an expression that had dropped the pleasantness entirely. What was underneath it wasn't anger exactly. It was the look of a man recalculating. It was, Clara thought the look of someone who had been certain he understood the people he was dealing with and had just discovered he didn't. That was the part she hadn't expected to enjoy as much as she did. Outside afterward in the street, there was a moment that Clara would think about for a long time after. A woman approached them. She was perhaps 60, well-dressed, the wife of one of the larger landowners in the county. A woman named Grace Aldford, whose husband had the kind of money and standing that made his wife's opinions matter to people who cared about such things. She stopped in front of Clara with the deliberate manner of someone who has made a decision. "That was very well done, Mrs. Walker," she said. Clara looked at her. She was not unaware that this woman had been among those staring at her veil on the day she arrived. "Thank you," Clara said. Grace Aldford nodded. Then she said quietly, almost to herself, "I owe you an apology for the day you arrived." She looked at Clara directly. "I was one of the people whispering. I'm not proud of it." Clara was still for a moment. It was not what she had expected. "I appreciate you saying so," she said. And she meant it, not because the apology erased anything, but because the woman had chosen to offer it without being asked, and that was worth something. Grace nodded again and moved on. Caleb appeared at Ethan's elbow. "I need a drink," he said. "That went better than I expected, and somehow I'm still exhausted." "You did well," Ethan said. "She did well," Caleb said with a nod toward Clara. "I followed her lead on the documentation argument. I'm not too old to admit when someone in the room knows more than I do." Clara began to say something self-deprecating. Ethan looked at her, just looked at her, not with any particular expression, just with that steady, complete attention that he had. The look that meant, "Don't do that." She closed her mouth. She didn't say the self-deprecating thing. That was its own kind of progress. But the day was not finished. They were walking toward the wagon when it happened. A man stepped out from beside the hardware store. Not Oates, not Monroe, but a third man Clara hadn't noticed in the meeting. Someone who had sat in the back row. He was large, with the weathered look of someone who worked outside, and he planted himself in their path with the practiced casualness of a person who wants to seem unthreatening while doing something threatening. "Walker," he said. Ethan stopped. "I work for Oates," the man said. "My name doesn't matter. What matters is I've been asked to give you a message." "Then give it," Ethan said. "Mr. Oates is a patient man. He's been doing this kind of work for a long time, and he's found that when people fight, things tend to get complicated." A pause waited. Ranching is a dangerous business. Accidents happen. Livestock go missing. Wells get contaminated. He let that sit. He wants Mr. and Mrs. Walker to consider whether the legal battle they're about to begin is worth the inconvenience. The street was quiet. 2 people across the way had stopped to listen. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Are you threatening my wife?" The man's eyes moved to Clara. Clara looked back at him without flinching. "I'm delivering a message," the man said. "Then deliver this one back," Ethan said. "I've been on this land for 15 years. I've survived drought and flood and sickness and loss, and I'm still standing. And anyone who decides to come after my ranch or my wife should understand exactly what they're choosing to walk toward." He took one step forward. "We'll see him in court." The man looked at Clara one more time. Then he turned and walked away. Ethan turned to Clara. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. And it was true, which surprised her. She was not frightened exactly. She was alert. There was a difference. Was that supposed to scare us off? "Yes," he said. "Does it—" Ethan picked up her hand, not dramatically, not as a gesture for anyone watching, but as a simple fact, his hand around hers, and said no. She looked down at their joined hands. Then she looked up at him. "Good," she said, "because I'm not done yet." They went to Caleb immediately. They told him about the man outside. Caleb's expression went very still, then very focused, and he said 2 things. One, that it needed to be reported to the sheriff today, and 2, that it changed the nature of the case significantly. If Oates is making threats, he's frightened, Caleb said. People who are confident they'll win legally don't need to threaten. You scared him today. Clara scared him today, Ethan said. Clara was already writing. She had her notebook out and was documenting the encounter. The man's physical description, his exact words, the time, the location, the names of the two witnesses across the street, who had been close enough to hear. Witnesses, she said, not looking up. We need their statements today before they talk themselves out of it. I'll go now, Caleb said. I'll come with you, Clara said. They'll be more likely to give a statement if it's requested by a woman than by an attorney, less formal. Caleb opened his mouth and then closed it. She's right again, Ethan said. They got both statements within the hour. By evening, the sheriff had a formal incident report on file. By the next morning, Caleb had filed an amended motion with the Tucson court, noting the witness intimidation incident and requesting expedited review. But that evening, something happened that none of the legal maneuvering had prepared Clara for. She was in the kitchen when Ethan came in from outside. He had been talking to Tom Ridley, who had stopped by after learning about the threat. She heard the door, heard the sound of him hanging up his coat, and then he came into the kitchen and stopped. She was at the table. But she wasn't writing. She had her hands flat on the table in front of her, and she was looking at nothing in particular with an expression that she became aware of only when she felt Ethan's attention on it. He sat down across from her. "What is it?" he said. She looked at him. "Nothing about the case." "I know," he said. "What is it?" She looked down at her hands. "That woman, Grace Aldford." "Yes." "She apologized," Clara said, "for the whispering when I arrived." "I heard," he said. "I didn't expect it," she said. I had decided that this town was like all the other towns, that I was going to work and do what needed doing and not ask anyone to see me differently, that it was safer that way." A pause. And then she just said it, without me asking. "People surprise you sometimes," Ethan said. "I'd forgotten that," she said. "I'd stopped expecting it." She looked up. "I think I'd stopped expecting most things." Ethan looked at her quietly for a long moment. "Clara," he said, "can I say something and have you actually hear it?" "I'll try." "You walked into that room today without the veil," he said, "in front of half the county. You stood up and made an argument that backed a territorial attorney into a corner in front of a deputy commissioner. You documented a witness intimidation incident on the steps outside and had 2 statements collected before sundown." He looked at her steadily. "And you did all of it as yourself, not hiding, not managing how much of you people could see." She didn't answer immediately. "It was necessary," she said. "Yes?" he said. "And you did it anyway, the same way you ran into a burning building." He leaned forward slightly. "Clara, do you understand what I'm saying to you?" She looked at him. His expression was the most open she had ever seen it, not performing sincerity, just actually there, actually present, the reserve entirely gone for once. "You keep thinking your courage is ordinary," he said. "It isn't. It never was." Something broke open very quietly somewhere in her chest. Not dramatically, not with tears, because she was not in this moment capable of tears. Just something that had been held tightly for a very long time, loosening by one careful degree. "You said something to me," she said slowly, "on my first day, before we left town." "I remember," he said. "You said you were looking for someone real." She looked at him directly. "Did you mean it?" "Yes. Even now, knowing what the last few weeks have been, knowing what's still coming with the court." "Especially now," he said. She looked at him for a long time. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "I came here because I needed somewhere to disappear," she said. That was the truth of it. "I wasn't looking for a husband. I was looking for somewhere that nobody knew me. Somewhere I could be nobody's story for a while." "I know," he said. "I could tell. What I didn't expect?" She stopped, started again. "I didn't expect to feel useful. I didn't expect someone to trust my opinion. I didn't expect—" She stopped again. He waited. "I didn't expect to want to stay," she said. "For its own sake. Not because I had nowhere else to go. Because I actually wanted to be here." The words cost her something. She could feel the cost of them, the vulnerability of saying a true thing out loud to someone who had the power to receive it or not. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Good," he said, simply, completely. Then he stood up and put the kettle on, because that was the kind of man he was, the kind who knew when the right answer was simple, and who knew that after a day like today, what both of them needed was something warm and ordinary and quiet. Clara sat at the table and felt the loosened thing in her chest settle into something she could only describe as the beginning of peace. Outside, the land was dark and wide and still, and inside, Roper lifted his head from the floor, looked at both of them, and put his head back down with the satisfaction of a dog who has been trying to communicate something for weeks and has finally gotten through. The letter from the Abilene sheriff arrived 2 days later. Clara opened it at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, and Ethan watched her read it, and he watched her face change in the particular way that faces change when something you suspected turns out to be true. She set it down, looked at him. "Monroe's real name is Alan Beckett," she said. "He used to practice in Wichita under that name. He was disbarred in 1878 for fraudulent land documentation." She touched the letter. "He came to Abilene the following year as James Monroe, and before Wichita—" She looked up. "He was a junior clerk for a man named Gerald Garrett." The kitchen was very quiet. "It's the same man," Ethan said. "It's the same man," she said. "He's been running this scheme across 3 territories under different names, and Oates isn't his employer." She looked at the letter again. "Oates is the front. Beckett is the architect." Ethan stared at her. "He's going to know you made the connection," he said. "When Caleb files this with the court." "He'll know," Clara said. "Yes. That means the threat from before." "I know what it means," she said. She looked up at him, and he could see her working through it, the risk, the calculation, the choice that wasn't a choice at all, because there was only one path forward, and they had both known it since the day they drove to the county clerk's office. "We file it," she said. "Everything. The Abilene connection, the disbarment, the pattern across 3 territories. We give Caleb everything, and we let the court see exactly who they're dealing with." Ethan looked at her. "You know this means it gets worse before it gets better," he said. "Yes," she said. "And you're not Ethan." She met his eyes. "I have spent 5 years running from things. From towns, from people, from my own reflection." Something clear and unafraid had settled into her expression. "I'm done running." He held her gaze, then he nodded, once, solid as a post driven into dry ground. "Then we take it all the way," he said. She picked up the letter, and somewhere in the posture of her, the set of her shoulders, the steadiness of her hands, the way she looked at the paper in front of her, like a problem to be solved rather than a threat to be survived, something had changed from the woman who had stepped off the stagecoach with an apology already on her lips. That woman had arrived expecting to be sent away. This woman was not going anywhere. Caleb Horn read the Abilene letter 3 times. The first time his expression was careful and professional. The second time, something shifted behind his eyes. The third time he set the letter down on his desk with the deliberate slowness of a man who is making sure his hands stay steady. "Alan Beckett," he said. "That's the name," Clara said. "Disbarred in 1878 in Wichita." Caleb looked up. "Do you understand what this means for the case?" "It means Monroe isn't licensed to practice law in this territory," Clara said. "Any filing he has made or intends to make is potentially invalid, and it means there's a pattern of fraud across 3 territories that a territorial court can't ignore." Caleb picked up the letter again. "If we present this to Judge Harlow, the case against Ethan's land falls apart," she said, "and Beckett faces criminal exposure. Which is why, Ethan said from the chair beside Clara, he's going to move before we get the chance. Caleb looked at him. How fast can you file? Ethan said. I can have the amended motion ready by tomorrow morning, Caleb said. But Ethan, if Beckett finds out we have this letter before I file, then we don't let him find out, Clara said. She leaned forward. Who in this office knows about the Abilene correspondence? Just us three, Caleb said. Keep it that way until the motion is filed, she said. Don't discuss it on the street. Don't mention it to anyone, not even Tom Ridley. She looked at Caleb directly. How secure is your office at night? Caleb blinked. I locked the door. That's not what I asked. A pause. The back window doesn't latch properly, Caleb admitted. I've been meaning to fix it. Clara looked at Ethan. Ethan was already standing. I'll fix it tonight, he said. Caleb stared at him. You're going to repair my window latch tonight because you think someone might break into my office for a letter. I think Beckett has been doing this across 3 territories, Ethan said. And I think a man who sends hired hands to make threats on a public street is not particularly worried about what he's willing to do. He picked up his hat. The window will be fixed by nightfall. Caleb looked between the two of them at the methodical calm they both carried. The quality of 2 people who had stopped being frightened of the problem and had simply become focused on solving it. And he said, with a sincerity that had nothing professional in it, I'm glad she came here. Ethan looked at Clara. So am I, he said. Clara looked at the desk. File the motion, she said. They drove back to the ranch in the late afternoon, and Ethan spent an hour at Caleb's office replacing the window latch with a piece of iron hardware from his own barn. Clara spent that hour sitting across from Caleb going through every document in the case, making sure the amended motion contained nothing that could be disputed on procedural grounds. When Ethan returned, she had found 2 minor errors in the motion's citation language, and Caleb had corrected both. How do you know legal citation format? Caleb asked. I read, she said simply. A great deal. For a long time I had very little else to do. Caleb looked at her with the expression of a man who was revising several assumptions simultaneously. The territory needs more attorneys, he said. You're aware of that. Clara looked up from the papers. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but the outline of one, the shape where a smile had been a long time ago and was beginning to find its way back. I'll keep that in mind, she said. That night the ranch was quiet, in a way that felt different from the quietness of the previous weeks. Not the quiet of waiting, not the quiet of 2 people being careful around each other. Something that had settled. After supper, Ethan sat on the porch. Clara came out and sat beside him without asking which was new. She had stopped asking permission for ordinary things, had stopped treating the simple act of occupying space as something that required justification. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it. He just moved slightly to give her more room, which was its own kind of answer. What happens if the court takes longer than we expect? She said. Then we wait, he said. And we keep the ranch running. Beckett might escalate. He might, Ethan said. And we'll handle whatever he does. A pause. We've been handling things pretty well so far. She looked at him sideways. That's a generous assessment. It's an accurate one. He looked out at the dark. Clara, when I filed that marriage advertisement, I told myself I was looking for someone practical. Someone who could work hard and build alongside me. That was the honest truth of it. He was quiet for a moment. What I didn't say because I hadn't admitted it to myself was that I was also looking for someone I could trust. Someone I didn't have to perform for. He turned and looked at her. I don't perform for you. I haven't since about the 3rd day. She looked at him. Is that unusual for you? I haven't been able to do it with anyone since Margaret, he said. The name lay between them gently. It always did. Margaret's presence in this house was not painful exactly, not anymore. It was more like a permanent grace, the memory of someone who had built something good and had the wisdom to build it in a way that could outlast her. She would be glad, Clara said, that the map helped. Yes, Ethan said. She would. A long silence. Roper came out and pressed himself against Clara's leg, and she put her hand on his back without looking down. I used to think that the worst thing that had happened to me was the fire, Clara said. The scar. What it cost me. She paused. I think now that the worst thing was letting them convince me they were right. That I was diminished. That I deserved less. She was quiet for a moment. I believed it for a long time. I know, he said. I'm not sure when I stopped, she said. I don't think there was one moment. I think it was... She looked at her hands. I think it was a lot of small moments, you asking my opinion and actually listening. Hank in the garden, the way you looked at me in the county clerk's office. She paused. The way you looked at me just now. How am I looking at you just now? He said. She met his eyes. Like I'm someone worth looking at, she said. He held her gaze steadily. You are, he said. It was not elaborate. It was not performed. It was Ethan Walker who said exactly what he meant, and nothing extra. She looked away at the dark land, but she was different when she looked away than she had been when she looked at him. Something had settled that she hadn't known was still unsettled. They sat there for a long time. Then she said, Tell me about Margaret. Not her papers, not the map. Her. He looked at her. Are you sure? He said. Yes, she said. So he did. He talked for a long time, which was unusual for Ethan. Talked about a woman who had laughed loudly at bad jokes and kept obsessive track of every rainfall total for 12 years and had opinions about cattle breeding that turned out to be correct approximately 80% of the time, which she documented. He talked about the way she could tell what kind of day he'd had before he said a word, and the way she insisted on reading aloud after supper from whatever book she was working through, and the way the house sounded for the first 6 months after she died, not silent exactly, but wrong. The way a song sounds when you take out a note that was carrying more than you realized. Clara listened without interrupting. When he stopped, she said, She sounds like someone who knew exactly how to be alive. Yes, he said. She did. I think... Clara paused. I think I'm only starting to figure that out. He looked at her. You're doing fine, he said. She almost deflected it. Almost. I'm trying, she said instead. He nodded. That was enough. They went inside at 10. At the bottom of the stairs, Clara stopped. She turned back. Ethan, she said. He looked at her. She crossed the distance between them, and she reached up, and she did something she hadn't done since the world had taught her that offering herself freely to another person's opinion ended in pain. She took his hand. Both of hers around his, one the way you hold something you've decided to trust. He looked down at her hands, then at her face. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The gesture said, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing here. I'm choosing you. He turned his hand over and held hers back. Good night, Clara, he said. Good night, she said. She went upstairs, and Ethan Walker stood at the bottom of the stairs for a full minute before he moved because something had happened that he needed a moment to carry properly, something that felt like the future opening. The morning Caleb filed the amended motion, Red Hollow did not look like a town on the edge of something significant. But it was. Caleb filed at 9 in the morning. By 11, a copy had been forwarded by telegraph to the territorial court in Tucson. By noon, word had quietly reached someone in Beckett's network, not because anyone from their side had spoken, but because Beckett had clearly cultivated a source somewhere in the chain of information, and that source was faster than any of them had anticipated. The first indication came when Ethan's hired man Hank rode in from the eastern pasture at midday. His horse breathing hard to report that 3 fence posts along the boundary line had been pulled clean out of the ground. Not knocked down. Pulled out. Deliberately. Ethan didn't go to see it himself immediately. He looked at Clara first. She was already thinking. He's trying to create physical evidence of a disputed boundary, she said. If the fence posts are removed, the boundary looks ambiguous on the ground, even if the paperwork is clear. Can that affect the court case? Ethan said. If we document it correctly, it helps us, she said. It demonstrates interference. Get the sheriff. Get him out there before anything else is disturbed. Measurements, photographs if the sheriff has any equipment, witness statements from Hank. Hank was looking at her with the expression he had worn since she corrected him about the garden, a kind of recalibrated respect that still sometimes surprised him out of its professional neutrality. Anything else? He said. Ride the whole eastern line, she said. If they pulled 3 posts, they may have disturbed others. We need to know the full extent before anyone else walks through there. Hank nodded and went. Ethan looked at Clara. I'm going to find the sheriff. I'm going to the office to tell Caleb, she said. Clara. Something in his expression stopped her. Be careful in town today. She met his eyes. I will. I mean it. I know you do. She picked up her coat. So do I. She walked into town alone, which she had not done since arriving in Red Hollow, and which she understood was itself a kind of statement. She did not wear the veil. She walked down the main street of Red Hollow past the general store and the barber and the post office with her folder of documents under her arm, and her face open to the morning air, and the people who saw her saw a woman with a scar walking with purpose, and most of them looked at her face for only a moment before looking at where she was going. That was different. That had changed. She noticed it without making anything of it the way you notice that a pain you'd grown accustomed to has quietly reduced. Caleb was already in his office when she arrived. He had heard about the fence posts. News traveled fast in Red Hollow, especially bad news, and he was composing an emergency notice to the court. This is obstruction, he said without preamble. It's also desperation, Clara said. Beckett knows the Abilene letter changes everything. He's creating confusion because it's the only move he has left. The court needs to see this as a pattern, Caleb said. The threat on the street now physical interference with the property. If I can get this before Harlow as supplemental evidence. Write it today, Clara said. I'll check the citation language. They worked for 2 hours. At one point, Caleb set down his pen and looked at her across the desk. Can I ask you something personal? He said. You can ask. When you arrived in Red Hollow, he said, I saw you that day from the courthouse steps. When you stepped off the coach. He paused, choosing words carefully. You looked like someone who had decided that being seen was the most dangerous thing in the world. Clara held his gaze. It was, she said, for a long time. What changed? She thought about Ethan at the kitchen table, asking why she always acted like she had to earn her place. She thought about his hand resting on the back of her chair while she wrote. She thought about last night, his hands around hers, the simplicity of it. Someone kept showing up, she said. Every day. Consistent. Without making a performance of it. She looked at the papers in front of her. It's hard to keep believing you're invisible when someone keeps seeing you. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He's a good man, he said. Ethan Walker. He's always been a good man. He just... A pause. He got very quiet after Margaret. We all worried he'd stay that way. He's still quiet, Clara said. That's different quiet, Caleb said. That's a man who's got something to be quiet about again. He picked up his pen. I'm glad you came to Red Hollow, Mrs. Walker. She looked at him. It was the second time in a week that someone had said that to her. The second time she hadn't known how to deflect it because it was offered without agenda, without the careful management of someone who wanted something in return. Just a plain statement of one person being glad that another person existed in their town. Thank you, she said, and meant it completely. The sheriff's report was filed by 3 in the afternoon. Hank's survey of the eastern boundary had found 5 posts, disturbed not 3, and had located a boot print near the creek bank that matched no one on the ranch. The sheriff, a deliberate man named Cody Marsh, who had been doing this work long enough to recognize the difference between ordinary vandalism and calculated provocation, had taken measurements and written everything down with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the paper would matter more than the ground eventually. Ethan was at the ranch when Clara returned. He was in the yard talking to Tom Ridley, who had come by after hearing about the fence posts, as neighbors do. He looked up when she rode in. She gave him the summary before she was off the horse. Caleb's supplemental filing the sheriff's report, the 5 posts instead of 3. His expression moved through several things: quickly concerned focus, and then a steady settling, that quality he had of arriving at resolution faster than most people. Tom Ridley shook his head. "This Beckett fellow has got nerve, I'll give him that." "He's got a pattern," Clara said. "And now we have a documented record of it." She looked at Ethan. "Caleb thinks we'll have a response from Tucson within the week. Judge Harlow apparently moves fast when he sees interference." "What do we do until then?" Tom said. "We work," Ethan said. "We fix the fence. We document everything. We don't give them anything else to use." He looked at Clara. "And we don't go anywhere alone." She raised an eyebrow. "Either of us," he added. "That includes me." Tom Ridley looked between them with the quiet amusement of a man watching two people who haven't quite caught up with what they are to each other yet. He left shortly after citing chores, but not before pressing Ethan's shoulder with one hand, in the particular way that men in this territory expressed everything they found difficult to say directly. That evening after supper, something happened that Clara would later think of as the moment the last wall came down. She was washing dishes, and Ethan was at the table reading the copy of Caleb's motion, and she could feel him reading it, the way you can feel someone's concentration in a small room, the particular focused quality of it, the occasional small sound of a page turning. Then he said, "Clara, come here." His voice was different, not urgent, not alarmed, quieter than usual if possible. She dried her hands and came to the table. He had his finger on a paragraph near the bottom of the motion. Caleb's description of the evidence establishing the ranch boundary. It cited Margaret's 1874 map. It cited the original survey. And then it cited in the last line the testimony of Clara Walker, resident of Lone Star Valley Ranch, regarding the fraudulent pattern established across 3 territories. Her name, in legal documentation, as a resident, not a guest, not a liability, a witness whose testimony carried weight. She looked at it for a long moment. "You see it," Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "That's who you are in this court record," he said. "Clara Walker, resident, witness, the person who found the connection." He looked up at her. "Not the woman behind the veil, not the woman with the scar, just who you are." She sat down. She sat down because her legs did something unexpected, not from weakness, but from the sensation of something that had been braced for a long time releasing. "I thought," she started, stopped, started again. "When I answered your advertisement, I told myself I was looking for somewhere to disappear. I said that to you. I meant it." She looked at the document. "I didn't know it was possible to arrive somewhere and become more visible instead of less." "Is that bad?" he said. She looked at him. "No," she said. "It's terrifying." A pause. "And it's the best thing that's happened to me in 5 years." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not briefly this time. Not as a gesture. He just left it there. She turned her hand over and held on. They stayed like that for a while with the document between them, and the lamp burning steady, and Roper asleep on the floor, and neither of them said anything else, because nothing else needed saying. The response from Tucson came on a Thursday, 6 days after Caleb filed the supplemental motion. Clara was in the barn when Ethan came to find her. She knew from the way he walked, not hurried but deliberate with something held carefully, that the news was significant. He handed her the letter. She read it standing in the barn doorway, with dust in the air, and Roper watching from 5 feet away with the intense attention he gave anything that seemed important to the humans. Judge Harlow had reviewed the amended motion and the supplemental evidence. He had issued a preliminary ruling affirming the original boundary of Lone Star Valley Ranch as legally established by the 1873 survey, finding that the creek's natural movement had no legal standing to alter a recorded deed. He had ordered an immediate cease and desist on any further action by Monroe or any party acting in his name against the Walker property, and he had referred the matter of Alan Beckett's fraudulent legal practice to the Territorial Attorney General's Office for Criminal Investigation. Clara read it twice. She handed it back. She looked at Ethan. "It's done," she said. He nodded. Something crossed his face, not relief exactly, not the kind that collapses inward. Something more like the feeling after a long effort finally completes, when you can feel both what it cost and what it was worth. "It's done," he said. Clara turned and leaned against the barn door frame and looked out at the land. The eastern pasture, the dry creek. The fence line repaired, now its posts solid in the ground. The wide, unremarkable, permanent land that was home. She had not used that word in a long time. Not in her own mind, not seriously, not as something that meant something rather than just a location. She used it now. This was home. "Ethan," she said. "Yes." "I want to open a school." A silence. "Here," he said. "On the ranch," she said, "or near it. There are children in this county whose families can't get them into town for school. I've heard about it from Tom Ridley, from Grace Aldford, from the women at the general store." She turned to look at him. "The school board in Abilene decided I wasn't fit to teach. The school board in Wichita decided the same. But there is no school board out here. There's just land and children who need what I have to give." He looked at her for a long moment. "You'd need supplies," he said. "Books, slates." "Yes. The old bunkhouse hasn't been used since I let the seasonal crew go 2 years back," he said. "It would need work. Walls, a proper floor." "Yes," she said again. "I can do most of that work myself," he said. "Tom Ridley's son is good with carpentry. He'd probably help." He looked at her steadily. "Is this what you want? Not what makes sense, not what fills the time, what you want." She looked back at the land. "I wanted to be a teacher from the time I was 12 years old," she said. "I never stopped wanting it. I just stopped believing I was allowed to want it." She turned to him. "I'm finished with that." He held her gaze. "Then we build you a school," he said. Just like that. No negotiation, no hesitation. "No, let's think about it," or "Are you sure?" or any of the thousand small ways people had of managing other people's ambitions back down to a manageable size. Just then, "We build you a school." She had to look away because something was happening in her throat that she wasn't prepared for, and she was not a woman who cried easily, hadn't been in years, but there was something about the absolute simplicity of that response that undid her in a way that nothing else quite had. She got herself back in 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then she turned around. "I'll make a list of what we need," she said. "I figured you would," he said. She walked past him toward the house, and his hand brushed her shoulder as she went. Just brushed it barely a touch, and she didn't stop walking, but she felt it the whole way to the porch. Roper trotted happily after her. That evening, Clara sat at the kitchen table with 2 pieces of paper. On one, she wrote the list of supplies for the school. On the other, she wrote a letter to the school board in Abilene. Not asking for anything, not appealing a decision. Just informing them formally and briefly that Clara Bennett Walker would be opening a school on the Walker Ranch in Red Hollow, Arizona Territory, effective the following spring, and that she anticipated enrollment of no fewer than 12 students in the first term. She signed it Clara Walker, teacher. She sealed it and set it with the outgoing mail. Then she picked up her pen and started on the supply list. Ethan saw the sealed letter but didn't ask about it. He just put another log on the fire and sat down across from her and picked up his book. 2 people at a table. A lamp between them. The sound of a pen moving across paper and pages turning, and outside the wind doing what the wind always did, moving across the land that was theirs, that had always been theirs, that always would be. Roper sighed from the floor. And in the warmth and the ordinary quiet of that evening, Something that had been broken a long time ago was finishing the process of becoming whole. The letter to the Abilene School Board went out on a Friday. The supply list for the school went to the general store in Red Hollow the following Monday. By Tuesday, word had traveled the way word always travels in small territories, not through any deliberate announcement, but through the particular current of human attention that moves faster than any newspaper. By Wednesday, Grace Aldford had appeared at the ranch with a box of primers she said had been sitting unused in her house for 3 years, and would Clara please take them, because they were doing no good collecting dust. Clara took them. She stood at the door holding that box, and felt something she recognized slowly as the specific texture of a life-changing direction. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a river changes course through consistent pressure over time, until one day you look up and realize the water is going somewhere entirely different than it used to go. "There are 7 families I can think of right now," Grace said, standing on the porch with her hands folded, "whose children have no school within reasonable distance. The Harpers, the Delgado family, the Okafor children out on the North Road." "I know about the Okafors," Clara said. "Tom Ridley mentioned them. Those children are sharp as tacks," Grace said. "The oldest girl especially. She's been teaching herself from her father's almanac because it's the only printed material in the house." She paused. "She's 9 years old." Clara held the box of primers and thought about a 9-year-old girl teaching herself from an almanac. She thought about herself at 12 certain she was going to be a teacher. She thought about every school board that had looked at her face and decided that certainty didn't count. "Tell the Harpers," she said, "and the Delgados, and anyone else you think should know. The school opens the first Monday of March." Grace Aldford smiled. It was the first time Clara had seen her smile fully, without the careful social management that women of her standing kept over their expressions. It made her look 20 years younger. "Good," she said. "It's past time." Ethan had been listening from inside the doorway. Clara heard him move away quietly when Grace left, heard him go to the barn, heard the sound of tools. The particular sound of a man who has decided to start building something. She went inside and put the primers on the kitchen table and stood looking at them for a moment. Then she rolled up her sleeves and went to help him measure the bunkhouse walls. The bunkhouse renovation took 3 weeks. Tom Ridley's son Jacob came 4 days out of 7, and he was everything his father had promised, quick, with a hammer better with a level, and possessed of the easy, industrious energy of someone who genuinely liked making things right. Hank helped with the heavier lifting without being asked, which was its own kind of statement, his way of adjusting something that had been subtly off since the day Clara corrected him about the garden. Clara worked alongside them. She moved boards, sorted nails, painted the interior walls, a clean white that she and Ethan debated for 20 minutes before agreeing on. "It should feel like somewhere you want to think," she said. "Then white," he said. She painted it herself. Both coats. On the last day when Jacob had gone home, and Hank had finished for the evening, and the bunkhouse turned schoolroom was done a real room with proper benches. Ethan had built a board fixed to the front wall that would serve as a chalkboard, and 7 primers stacked on the teacher's desk that Ethan had also built slightly taller than a student's desk so the teacher could see the room Clara walked in alone. She stood in the middle of the room. She thought, "This is mine. Not borrowed, not contingent, not something she'd been given permission for or would lose the moment someone decided she didn't deserve it. Hers, built by people who believed she should have it." She put her hand flat on the teacher's desk. Ethan appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. She looked at him across the room. "It's good," she said. "It is," he said. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it." He shook his head slightly. "You did most of it. I mean for believing it should exist," she said. "Before I was completely sure of it myself." He walked into the room and stood beside her and looked at the benches, the chalkboard, the stack of primers. "You were always sure," he said. "You just needed somewhere safe enough to be sure out loud." She looked at him. And then she did something that would have been impossible for the woman who stepped off the stagecoach in a dark veil 3 months ago. She leaned into him, just leaned her shoulder against his arm, her head tilting the smallest degree toward him, and he put his arm around her with the naturalness of something that had been true for a long time and was only now being named. They stood like that in the schoolroom they had built together, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing left that words could do, that the silence wasn't already doing better. The school opened on a Monday in March as promised. 9 children came the first day. Clara had expected 7. She had prepared for 7. 2 extra appeared because word had continued to travel, and because parents who had been quietly hoping for something like this had been willing to drive further than she'd anticipated. She stood at the front of the room that morning and looked at 9 faces looking back at her. Different ages, different backgrounds. A boy of 6 who still sucked his thumb when he thought nobody was looking. A girl of 13 who was already embarrassed to be in a room with the younger ones, but who had come anyway because she wanted what was being offered badly enough to tolerate the embarrassment. The Okafor girl Grace had mentioned, 9 years old, sitting in the second row with her hands folded precisely on the desk in front of her, and eyes that took in everything. Clara looked at all of them. She thought about the Abilene School Board, about the 3 men who had looked at her face and decided these children would be better off without her. Then she picked up a piece of chalk. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Mrs. Walker. We are going to begin." Ethan stood outside the schoolroom door for the first 20 minutes of that first class. Not because he didn't trust her, because he wanted to hear it. The sound of her voice in that room, clear and certain, and alive with something it hadn't had when she arrived with purpose that had a place to go. He listened to her ask the children their names, listened to her explain what the year ahead would cover, listened to her say in the particular voice she used when she meant something completely, "There is no question in this room that is foolish. The only foolish thing is not asking. You have permission to ask anything." He walked back to the barn. He had work to do. He was also quietly and completely the happiest he had been in 4 years. The response came from the Abilene School Board 5 weeks after Clara sent her letter. It was brief, bureaucratic in tone. It informed her that the board had received her correspondence and noted her intentions, and that while they wished her well in her endeavors, they wanted to clarify that their previous decision had been made in the best interests of students and remained unchanged. It was, in other words, nothing. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the defensive confirmation of people protecting a decision they knew was indefensible. Ethan watched her read it at the kitchen table, watched her set it down. "Are you angry?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. She looked up. "You should be angry," he said. "Not because it'll change anything they did, but because what they did was wrong. And anger that knows it's right is useful. It keeps you going." He looked at her steadily. "Let it keep you going." She looked at the letter for another moment. Then she folded it, set it aside, picked up her lesson plan for the following week. "I have 11 students now," she said. "The Hargrove family sent their 2 boys yesterday." "I heard," he said. "I'm going to need more chalk," she said. "I'll get it Friday," he said. She nodded and went back to work. The letter from Abilene went into the folder where she kept all the documents from the land case, all the correspondence, all the records. Not because she was keeping it for any particular purpose, but because she had decided that the paper record of her life, all of it, including the rejections, including the closed doors, was hers, and she was done letting any piece of it disappear as if it hadn't happened. It had happened. She had survived it. That was the whole story. It was in early April that the second twist came, the one none of them had seen approaching. A man arrived in Red Hollow on the Thursday stage. Not a threatening man, not a lawyer. A slight older man in a dusty coat who went directly to Caleb Horn's office and introduced himself as a representative of the Territorial Attorney General. Caleb sent word to the ranch within the hour. They met that afternoon, Ethan, Clara, Caleb, and the Attorney General's representative, whose name was Fitch, a quiet man who had the tired eyes of someone who had been dealing with land fraud schemes for long enough to have lost his capacity for surprise. The investigation into Alan Beckett, Fitch said, has expanded. Clara went still. How far? Caleb said. Across 4 territories, Fitch said. We have identified 9 separate instances of the same scheme running back to 1876. At least 3 landowners who paid, rather than fight, and lost property value as a result. 2 additional cases where the scheme succeeded completely, and properties changed hands under fraudulent circumstances. He set a file on Caleb's desk. Beckett had partners. Oates was one. There were 2 others. Did they arrest him? Ethan said. Beckett was arrested in Santa Fe 2 weeks ago, Fitch said. Monroe Beckett is in custody. Oates has fled. We expect to find him. He paused. But that's not entirely why I'm here. He looked at Clara. The case against Beckett in the Walker property matter is the strongest we have, he said. It has the most complete documentation, the timeline, the pattern evidence, the Abilene connection, your work, Mrs. Walker. He said that without embellishment, without performance, just as a fact. The Territorial Attorney General's office would like to use the Walker case as the lead matter in the prosecution. It will go to trial in Tucson, likely in the autumn. He paused. We would need your testimony, both of yours, but primarily yours. He was looking at Clara. The room was quiet. You want me to testify, she said. In Tucson, in a territorial court. Yes, he said. Caleb leaned forward. Clara, you would be testifying as the key witness in a fraud prosecution that could result in criminal conviction and potentially set precedent for how territorial courts handle land scheme cases across. I understand what it is, Clara said. She looked at Ethan. He looked back at her with the expression that she had come to understand completely by now. Not telling her what to do. Not managing her toward a decision. Just I'm here, whatever you choose. She looked at Fitch. When would you need my answer? She said. I'll be in Red Hollow through Saturday, he said. Then you'll have it by Friday, she said. She and Ethan drove back to the ranch in a silence that was not uncomfortable, but was full-packed with the weight of something significant waiting to be processed. It was Clara who broke it. You know what it means, she said. If I testify in Tucson, my name in territorial court records, Clara Walker witness, in public proceedings. I know, he said. It means everything comes out, she said. The fire, the school boards, the reason I answered the advertisement, all of it becomes a matter of record that anyone can read. Yes, he said. Does that concern you? She said. He drove for a moment. Does it concern you? He said. She thought about it honestly. No, she said, and realized as she said it that it was true. No, it doesn't. I spent 5 years being afraid of my own history, afraid that if people knew it, it would define me. She watched the land moving past. But it already defines me. The fire is why I have this scar. The school boards are why I answered your advertisement. The scar is how I found this ranch. She paused. My history is why I'm sitting here. I don't want to hide it anymore. Ethan looked at the road for a long time. Then, Tom Ridley told me something the week you arrived. He said, that woman of yours has the look of someone who's been carrying a load too long alone. A pause. He wasn't wrong. No, she said. He came by yesterday, Ethan said. Asked how you were. I told him you were building a school and preparing to take a land fraud case to territorial court. He glanced at her sideways. He said, good, she'll manage that just fine. And he went home. Clara laughed, a full, real laugh. The kind that had been coming more easily lately, not surprised out of her, not escaped accidentally, but genuinely present. Tell Mr. Fitch yes, she said. Tell him Friday morning. I'll ride in tomorrow, he said. They reached the ranch. The schoolroom light was still visible from where Jacob had been doing some final trim work that afternoon. She could see the stack of slates through the window. She stood looking at it for a moment. Ethan, she said. Yes. Do you remember what you said to me on the first day when I told you I wasn't beautiful? I remember, he said. You said you were looking for someone real. She turned to look at him in the fading light. I've been thinking about that. About what real means. She paused. I think real means this. All of it. The land case and the school and testifying and the letter from Abilene that said nothing, and the children in that room on Monday morning. She looked at him. That's who I am. That's all of it. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. That's who you are. And that's what you meant, she said. That first day. That's exactly what I meant, he said. She nodded. Then she went inside and wrote the letter to Fitch herself in her own hand, in the clear, precise script that had documented surveys and cross-referenced fraud patterns and composed legal citations, the same hand that had been told in 3 cities that it wasn't fit to hold a piece of chalk. She signed it, Clara Walker. I will testify. She sealed it and set it with the morning mail. Ethan was at the table. She sat across from him. Roper, as always, settled between them. There's something else, she said. He looked up. The girl, she said. The one I carried out of the fire. She'd be 9 years old now. You mentioned her, he said. That night on the porch. I've been thinking about writing to Caldwell, she said. Not to... She paused. Not to ask for anything, just to let her mother know that the woman who carried her daughter out is here. Is well. Has a life. She looked at her hands. I spent 5 years thinking the fire was only about what it took from me. I think I forgot what it gave to someone else. Ethan set down his book. Write the letter, he said. She wrote it that same night. It was short. Warm. It said, Your daughter is the reason I am brave enough for the life I am living. I hope she is well. I hope she is happy. She does not need to know my name, but I wanted you to know I think of her. It went out the following morning with the letter to Fitch. 3 weeks later, a letter came back from Caldwell. It was from the mother. Her name was Alice Prentice. She had spent 5 years, she wrote, trying to find the woman who had run into the fire. She had asked around. She had written to the Caldwell sheriff. No one had been able to tell her. And now she knew. She wrote, My daughter's name is Clara. We named her after you. We did not know your name, but we named her after the kind of person we hoped you were. I am glad we were not wrong. Clara read the letter at the kitchen table. She read it twice. Then she put it down very carefully and pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Ethan said nothing. He just stayed in the room. Present. Witness. That was enough. She came back down from wherever she had gone. She picked up the letter. She folded it and put it in the inside pocket of her coat closest to her chest. She looked at Ethan. There's a girl in Caldwell named Clara, she said. I heard, he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. Something in her face was unguarded in a way she'd only let herself be with him in these rooms in this house that had been too quiet before she came. I think I'm done being afraid, she said. He held her gaze. You've been done for a while, he said. You just needed to catch up with yourself. She looked at him. Really looked at him. The weathered face, the steady eyes, the hands that had built her a schoolroom without asking what it would cost. And she understood completely, and without reservation, what had happened here. She had come to Red Hollow to disappear. She had arrived in pieces behind a veil with an apology already in her mouth. She had expected to vanish into the work and the land and the silence. Instead, she had been found, not rescued, not fixed. Found the way you find something that was always there that only needed the right person to look in the right place. And she had found something in return. A man who spoke honestly and loved quietly and built things that lasted. A ranch that had become a home. A room full of children who would learn from the very first lesson that no question was foolish and every person deserved to be heard. The territorial court testimony in Tucson went for 4 days in October of that year. Clara Walker stood in that courtroom in a plain, dark dress, her scar visible to every person in the room, and she delivered her testimony in the clear and precise voice of someone who had stopped apologizing for knowing what she knew. Beckett was convicted on 6 counts of fraud. The judgment was referenced in territorial land law decisions for years afterward. In the courtroom record, her name appeared 41 times. Clara Walker. Teacher. Rancher's wife. Witness. Not the woman behind the veil. Not the woman with the scar. Not the woman who had whispered once on a dusty street in Red Hollow that she was not beautiful. Just Clara Walker. Entirely herself. More than enough. Back in Red Hollow, the school on Lone Star Valley Ranch grew to 14 students by the following spring, then 19. Then in the third year, 26, and Clara had to ask Jacob Ridley to build a second row of benches. She never stopped teaching. She never stopped being the woman who ran into the fire. And in the county records of the Arizona Territory, in the property deed for Lone Star Valley Ranch, the boundary line was recorded exactly where it had always been, where Margaret Walker's map had placed it, where the original survey had established it, where it would remain. Some things correctly documented, correctly defended, correctly loved, do not move. Not for floods. Not for fraud. Not for the cruelty of people who cannot see past what is visible. Some things hold. Ethan Walker knew that. Clara Walker had learned it. And in the quiet of the ranch on the evenings after school, with Roper at their feet, and the lamp between them, and the wide Arizona dark outside the window, they lived it, two people who had come to each other broken and ordinary and entirely real, and had built from that honesty something that neither of them could have built alone. He had said it on the first day. He had meant it from the first day, and every day that followed had proven it to be the truest thing spoken on that street, in that town, in that territory. You're everything I need. Not beautiful, not perfect, not easy or uncomplicated or without history. Real. And real, in the end, was the only thing that ever truly lasted.